This episode contains discussions of child abuse, neglect, and trauma within the context of child protection social work. These topics may be upsetting for some viewers. Please take care while watching. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Capes of Kamloops podcast, where we celebrate our local working heroes as their works are depicted on the big screen. Today we are discussing Case 39, starring Renee Zellweger and Jodelle Furland, released in 2009. I'm one of your hosts, Zach.
I'm Kyle, and today we are joined by Caleb Lippmann.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about what you do?
I am a child protection social worker in the city of Kamloops. There's multiple agencies here in town, different styles, and I work on what's called a family service team, which does long-term work. So the initial phase is called an intake. That's when a call comes in, a report about a family. And then if it's determined that there's some long-term work needed, possibly court involved, possibly services are involved with the family, then they hand it over to my team and a social worker like me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So just to kind of get it out of the way, obviously, we're talking about Case 39. It's a bit of a supernatural horror. Have you ever encountered anything supernatural in your line of work?
Not to that extreme. Really, at least to the best of my knowledge, what happened when I was gone, I'm not sure. But no, I've heard of some extreme events with like social workers and child protection social workers, but I have never experienced that. I've come across different like religious beliefs and faiths where, you know, you're adjusting your approach to meet the family's needs, or not touching certain items, or you don't handshake with women at times because they don't physically contact people outside their family. So things are in the same realm, but definitely not like that.
Yeah.
How are you with horror films? Because we gave you a bit of a scary one. Scarier than the other ones
you could have told me that ahead of time, folks. I thought it was going to be more about social workers instead of that. But no, I don't mind horror movies. They're not my main genre. But yeah, as it started to go along, I was like, what have they done to me?
Yeah. Our original goal was a film called Short Term 12. Which is just social workers. I highly recommend it. No supernatural possession or anything like that. But unfortunately, obviously, all of these episodes are paired with a screening that we did at the Paramount, and we couldn't get the rights for Short Term 12. But
Demon children are more fun.
Yeah, there we go. We figured you'll throw horror into the mix. Why not?
I also didn't know anything about the movie when we went to watch it, so I was also kind of like, whoa, wild. Yeah, no, well, I'm glad that it wasn't too bad because, like I said, you got a little bit more of a scarier one than we gave out. But I mean, I think a question that I have as well regarding the horrors of the film is social working can be kind of a scary line of work at times. Would you say?
I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. To start off, she was attending the home, and sounded like she'd called ahead and made an appointment because that's what she was saying when she was trying to get in. But we walk in cold to we don't know what over and over again. One of the jobs that I do is I'll work evenings and weekends as well, and then you're covering potentially the whole city. And so it's people you don't know, not ones you're familiar with from like previous work, but you're just going in cold and you have no idea what you're going to encounter when you're doing that. So you have to have a decent amount of courage. Now, you don't expect guns to be drawn on you or demons or like those are very extreme, to be clear. But you just can't say for sure that that's not going to be the day.
So you have to be quite adaptable, I would assume.
Very, yeah. Because you don't know, are the people on the other side sober? Have they taken maybe their mental health medications? Are they off their medications? How do you relate to that? How do you connect with them? How do you have a conversation with someone where there may be an incapacity from a substance or a condition? And so how are they going to react? It's a lot different when people are Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, they've had their coffee, there's a lot different approach than at nighttime. So you just never know.
Do you feel like this film kind of gives viewers a fair view of what a day in the life of a social worker is? And do you think that it gives a fair view of the families that social workers would work with?
I actually was kind of impressed overall with that side of it. A few things I'll pick out, and I know we'll talk more about it, so I hope I'm not repeating myself, as I always say. But, how busy is she? How many files does she have? One of the things that I liked about this movie in particular was, I guess I'm not giving spoilers, so I'll just I'll talk about everything. But she and I can't remember Ian McShane's character's name, but Emily Jenkins and the police officer, they burst in. This child's about to be murdered, right? But how did it flip by the end of the movie where she was the one that was actually finishing off the child? So like you have one perspective when you start. Do we critically think? Do we change based on new facts and figures? And then there was that scene where she was in the parents' bedroom and she was noticing the physical damage to the house, the locks on. Like she was starting to notice other things. And that's what this was great about the movie, where it showed a progression of, we can assume one thing at the start, but by the end of it, we've got a completely different perspective. And that's a large part of what our job is to continuously gather facts to see, does this hold up? What we heard at the beginning, is it still true a year later, a month later, a day later? What happens if a court order changes? There's so many factors that go into this. We're constantly assessing and reassessing. So I liked it from that perspective, where it showed sort of a conclusion at the beginning was turned on its head at whatever point in time, halfway through, we'll say. But that's very indicative of our work.
Nice. Yeah. It sounds like you're constantly on your toes every day.
Which I don't mind, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's some of the, I don't want to say all the gray hair I've got's fun, but, it's a lot of work because we're affecting people's lives. We're affecting children's lives. If we're glib, if we're not thorough, we are not doing the community a service. So in my world, in my job with my team leader and team and everything that we're trying to do is to make a positive impact, which isn't always the greatest impact for some families because of where their situation may be. But we want to do our best for all these families. And I think that's what they deserve.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of sequences in the film where Renee Zellweger's character is shown in the office with a lot of folders and case files. So how would you say the film depicts the caseload of a social worker? Do you feel like it's that piled on to one social worker at a time, or is it more exaggerated for the film?
What I'm going to say is it varies. It depends on what community you're in, how much support there is, how much staffing there is. I might be jumping ahead to a question later, so I don't want to do that.
That's okay.
But along the lines of, if you think of some communities, they've got one social worker instead of a team of 8. So the caseload could vary differently compared to some of the bigger centers where they're fully staffed. And so there's a much more equal distribution of files compared to when you're the only person and all you're dealing with is crisis. So you're not able to complete files the way that you would like to. And so it piles up. I'll say this, that at one point in time here in Kamloops, my caseload was at 96. Average is supposed to be about 25.
Oh, wow.
But we were down staff. There were a myriad of reasons. So yeah, at times it can be that bad. It's not supposed to be, but if you keep showing up and and bad things happen for whatever reason, then you might be it. And it's not unrealistic to see, 39 files or a busy caseload.
Nice. And kind of along the same lines of the accuracy of the film, do you think that the processes they went through for at-home interviews and in-office interviews were accurate to what you would go through?
Yes and no. So in BC, we try to interview children alone and apart, is what we call it. So this might be in the home, but we're in the bedroom and the parents are, say, in the living room. because we want to hear from the children without them being influenced by anyone. I mean, I've sat on the floor for 45 minutes while trying to talk to a child and needed to do some old man yoga to get up afterwards, because it's like, but that's where the child is comfortable. And we're having hard conversations about possibly some of the worst things that have ever happened to children. So we want them to be comfortable. We don't want them to be influenced or to have that process, that interview process tainted. So I believe the dad's name was Edward Sullivan in the film. And he was walking outside where the child was being interviewed, Lilith was being interviewed, and he's looking in. Mm-hmm. That would be something that we tried to avoid, specifically to this movie, because if he's glaring at the child, what's the message to the child? Right. Either you don't say what you shouldn't say, or I want you to tattle on, another parent, should the parents be broken up, or something like that, where there's an influence exerted on the child, and that would affect the interview. So we try to interview alone and apart. Sometimes it's okay to interview siblings together, but not with an adult present. And it might take 2 or 3 times before the child is comfortable with that. But those are sort of like broad strokes what the difference would be between what the film showed and what we would try to do.
Nice. Yeah, that definitely stood out to me as a moment where I was like, yeah, that doesn't seem right.
Correct.
Yeah. How would you say the film represents the relationship between social workers and like the police force and psychologists? Because in the film, Ian McShane plays a detective, and Bradley Cooper plays a psychologist that Renee Zellweger is kind of close to in a personal way, mm-hmm. which helps for the narrative. But in reality, what are the relationships like with the police force and psychologists in situations such as this?
And I know we're going to talk about sort of conflicts of interest before, but that, I know for a movie narrative, it fit better than trying to be realistic. But, that could really be considered a conflict of interest when the social worker and the child's counselor are in a relationship together. So clear that one up. But overall, here's what I'd say. When I was saying earlier about how we try to be so thorough. So, I've sat at school-based team meetings, and there's 2 to 8 people at the table talking to me about the child or the children in this family. We can talk to police, we can talk to counselors, we can talk to neighbors, we can talk to a whole lot of other people that a child psychologist or counselor, I'll lump them all together if I say counselor and psychologist, but mean the same thing. They only get maybe 45 minutes with the child sitting on a couch. They don't get the broad, the depth and breadth of information that we might have. And so we do try to work closely with counselors, with psychologists to share pertinent information with them, but they don't have the ability to get as much information if the person is gatekeeping. Not saying that kids would do that, but I mean, I'm almost 50 and I can barely tell you my feelings. So how would a 5-year-old know to say that, this is anxiety and not I'm sad? So things like that are where I think we get a lot more information and we can share. Sometimes counselors might need that information to know some of the events that have gone on for this child. When it comes to police, I think I'm trying to remember if in the movie the detective needed to get a warrant to do the removal. That I could be wrong on that, but we don't need police involvement to do a removal. So we can remove. We have to go to court. We don't need the police present, but there's multiple times where we're involved with the police, whether they're doing an investigation. I'll just use like a shaken baby example, where we find out fairly early on that there's been non-accidental injuries to a child. That's assault. So police have to have an interview or investigation, and they do their interviews and they do their pieces, and we're kind of working with them, but we can't mess up their work by going in and doing interviews that might change what someone then says to the police. So we follow along behind them. We work with them. We might be if you've seen the stereotypical shows where there's an interview room and there's the glass and we might be on the other side of it. So we're hearing an interview happen at the same time, to not put children through like 3 different interviews. Let's try to do one. So that's where we sometimes partner up with the police a lot better. I was mentioning working after hours earlier. I was trying to remember if it's like 4 or 5 times now where I've been knocking on a door and there's between 2 to 5 police officers behind me waiting to go in and do an arrest. And, I'm like, is this the spot I actually thought my life would be, that I've got multiple people behind me with bulletproof vests and tasers and batons? And what's my play if they start rushing in here? Like, where do I go? To the left, to the right, squish to the bottom? You just don't know. So I don't think they would actually do that harm, but when there's danger, they're going to act. They're not going to sit me down and tell me where to go. It's go time, and I'm there. So we do partner up an awful lot to answer that question, and it can be in very different roles.
Do you think that Wayne is a good portrayal of someone in his position, kind of as the team leader? And do you think that his recommendations about evidence are founded in something you would hear in the workplace?
Absolutely. I found it interesting in the sense that, like, Canada doesn't have a national child protection legislation. It's by each province. And then, of course, this was set in New York, which is another country and another jurisdiction. So I was happy to see a decent amount of similarities. So we operate under legislation here in BC. And I don't know if today, this interview with this family is ever going to matter in court, but I have to contemplate that it will. And so that connection to evidence, that connection to this may be in court, it affects how I do my job, that I'm aware of that accountability. I'm aware of the stakes here. And whenever I have students or talking to new hires, we write to 3 people. We're writing to the child when we're documenting, because they may see this one day. We're writing to the next social worker because we don't know when this may pop up down the road. And we're writing to the judge. So when I'm asking questions, when I'm documenting, I don't know if this interview is actually going to be evidence one day, but I have to believe that it may. And so my documentation lines up with that I might not have heard any disclosure or, that the law has been broken in any way, shape, or form, but this conversation may affect something down the road. So I firmly believe that stance that he was saying about looking for evidence is so true. If I'm going to tell a judge that harm has been done to a child, and the judge's next question is, how do you know? I need that evidence, right? And so it was spot on that if we don't have the evidence, then we might know something has happened. Let's go back to that, talking about the police and the shaken baby. We have the evidence. This baby has been harmed. But who and when? Was it mom? Was it dad? Was it someone else that came into the house? Like, without knowing those things, it's really hard to make a plan. It's hard to say. So we are trying to gather evidence all the time about these matters without knowing if this is the evidence that we actually need. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Constantly aware that it could be the linchpin evidence, even.
Yeah.
This definitely sounds like a very high attention to detail job, for sure.
And I think that's where, the loss of hair on the top and the gray hair in the beard is showing up. That, but it's only fair to families that we do this, right? That we are collecting as correct as we can be at all times. That's what they deserve. So I agree with you, but I also think that's the minimum that we should be doing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know the community as a whole really appreciates that kind of attention and that dedication. So thank you for that. Yes,
you're welcome.
You. Going back a little bit, you talked a little bit about connecting with the child. There is a scene in the movie where Renee Zellweger gets down by a fountain, I believe, and kind of sheds off the social worker persona to really get more of a personal connection with the child. How do you feel that scene was depicted? Do you feel like that's a pretty realistic way to approach connecting with the child in a situation such as the one we find in the film?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, every child's different. So your connection point, your connection method, like the amount of stuff I've had to learn about Pokemon and like, you know, things that kids are into that I'm not, but you're trying to build rapport with children through any and everything. Sometimes children have been told, don't talk to social workers, don't talk to police, don't talk to your teachers, like be afraid of authority figures. So then, and I mean, I'm almost 6'2", so talking to a 5-year-old, there's some big differences here, and how intimidating is that for them? So how do we break down those barriers to reach these children, to get into a conversation with them, have them explain what their life is like so that we may have to take action outside of that. So that rapport building is just how I'll lump it under, is so important. It can take quite a while with some children because some kids are just shy. It's not that something bad has happened or not that they've been told not to talk to us. They're just shy kids. And here's a stranger. I've been told about stranger danger. How do we get through that barrier with kids, which is perfectly natural, and then have a conversation with them, like I said before, about some really brutal stuff that we don't want to talk about, that we don't want to hear in many ways that has happened, but we have to get kids to that point where they feel comfortable talking about some of the worst violations that have ever happened. So that technique or things that she was doing, it does make a lot of sense, or you see that, but you have to read the child as well, know what they're into, or have, 6 or 7 different ways to try to reach the kids that, I don't have that high squeaky voice of like a child's talk show or a child's morning show type of, relatability, right? You have to be real at the same time. That kids can spot a phony, that if I'm putting on a clown persona, will that be relatable to them? Will they trust this if I'm like, not shape-shifting in front of their eyes, because this is a supernatural movie, we don't want to go there. But like, am I being realistic to them? Am I being someone that they can look at and trust? And so if I'm compromising that, even in rapport building, they pick that up.
Nice. Just to kind of switch it up a little bit, we've been talking a lot about the accuracies, ironically, for a horror movie. You don't hear that too much.
No.
Was there anything in the film that you felt kind of was exaggerated about your work?
I just think, so from the movie narrative point of just tying everything together and just to a few short characters, that's unrealistic. So, when you're working with a family, you might be talking to 12, 20 people, as opposed to just 3. So that is a bit unrealistic. But if that's the biggest gripe I've got, it's not too bad. I was just trying to think of what else I was thinking about unrealistic. And again, I should also say too, I've worked in some small towns. I've worked in some bigger urban centers, and that boundary crossing of like sharing personal information. I wouldn't do that here, but if you're in a town of 1,500 people, it might not be hard to find where the social worker lives, right? And people might already have your personal information. So, in many ways, we don't try to do that, but sometimes you can't help if you're in a small town. So I'm throwing that out there a bit as well, that in New York, in Kamloops, you don't need to do those sorts of things. But unfortunately, in some smaller towns, it might already have been done. Yeah. So those are, from a practice perspective, unrealistic, but you might not be able to help it in Spuzum.
Yeah, that might be tough.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you think that, and we've talked a little bit about this already, do you think that the kind of day-to-day portrayal of being in the office was accurate in Case 39?
Yeah, I think this is a job you can bury yourself in if you let it. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that, it's my job, but it's people's lives. And, I get paid only 7 hours a day, but I could work 12 quite easily to try to meet all the needs that are on my caseload. And so you're always left kind of unsatisfied with how well you have done for the day. But it might have been everything that you could do. And yet, you're still going to have unfinished pieces because these are people's lives. And so there's a responsibility and a duty with that. But at the same point in time, if I'm doing nothing but 14-hour days, then well, what about my well-being? What about my family? This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so I can't complete it all on Monday. I've got other days of the week to work, and that's important as well. So it's realistic that you can spend a lot of time, more time than, I think in the movie she was at work late at night, or it was dark out when she was at the office. And, that is possible if you let it, but you have to survive. You have to last. And so you do have to have some boundaries in many ways, because otherwise you just won't make it.
Wow. Yeah, no, I definitely am pretty interested to hear a little bit more about, it definitely sounds like this type of work can put a real weight on, you probably feel like you're taking on the whole world on your shoulders at times. And you were just talking a little bit about like mental health, and talking about how sometimes it just feels like maybe you're getting nowhere despite the hours you're working. I would be curious, if you don't mind me asking, like, how do you find those how do you define those moments of success for you personally? Like, how do you not take the work so heavy on you? Like what how would you describe, oh man, what am I trying to say here? I lost it. But you know what I mean? Like how would you how would you prevent yourself from falling into a depression, or falling into these deep despairing thoughts, because the work that you're doing is just so heavy, and also, like you said, like it's their lives, so it's also like a real responsibility that you're dealing with. And I would just, if you don't mind sharing, like how does that affect you personally, and how do you prevent yourself from falling into those dark places?
This is a conversation I have with like new hires, with students, that, until you're on this side of the wall, or the desk, as it were, it's really hard to explain. Like this movie, I think it showed, but it didn't weigh the impact on you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because there's days that we have a slam dunk case, we go to court and a judge throws it out. And so how do you handle that? Now, all the right steps were done, but a family is still at risk, or a child is at risk, or a child dies. And so you have to build up some supports. And mine will be different than yours, or different than the next social workers. So I don't want to say there's a one size fits all, but you have to get work out of your head at the end of the day. I learned early on, I can't take just a week off, because Monday and Tuesday, I'm remembering all the things I didn't get done by the Friday before I went away. And then Thursday, Friday, I'm ramping up to remember I got to do all those things on Monday when I go back. So that's a simple thing of just book 2 weeks at a time. And then you can actually decompress. You can get that out of your head or your system. I try to go out into the woods an awful lot, snowshoeing, camping, get that forest therapy, some exercise, friends, family, sports. Like, it can be simple, it could be benign, it could be those things that are already there, but it gets work out of your head. And so whatever that is for any person, social worker that's going to do this job, you have to have those boundaries so that work gets out of your head. You don't always forget, because this child said something that you will never be able to forget. And so that has to live there, and you have to have space where it's not changing your reactions with your significant others and children and family and whatever else. So you have to have that spot where you can kick that thought to keep it from ruining this moment, this Christmas dinner, or whatever it is that you're doing. You have to be able to cope that way. And so how you mentioned mental health, like, I know a lot of colleagues are are seeing counselors or therapists. Those are healthy expressions. Some people have chosen unhealthy expressions at times, and that doesn't help them either. So it's an ongoing assessment, because what I've heard up until this point in time, maybe it's okay. 16 years doing this and I might be doing okay, but that doesn't mean tomorrow I won't have to radically alter a lot of things that I'm doing because of what I was told. And so how do you prepare for that? That's answering a question with a question, which I'm not supposed to do. But like, are you so rigid that, I go home, I have a cup of tea, a journal, and that's it. That's the only thing I'll ever need. Well, then you're going to find yourself slipping, and as things go on, or as time goes on. So you have to be constantly assessing and reassessing that to make sure. Like I've had several colleagues that they're like, I can't do this anymore. And that's fine. They've moved on to other positions. And several of them I've asked, like, do you see me cracking? Like, am I right? Because it's people that I trust. And are they evaluating me? Like, do they see, I mentioned being like thorough and detailed. Am I losing it there? Like, are they seeing that? It's not just a self-assessment. There's people that I trust that could call me out. So a wide variety of options is what I'd say. And again, like what works for me wouldn't necessarily work for the colleague beside me. So we have to constantly be testing ourselves and our mental health, or our approaches to mental health, or those sorts of things, just to make sure that we're going to last.
Wow. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate hearing that and the perspective and just being vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. So how do you think the movie is at portraying decisions under pressure, especially on the part of Renee Zellweger's character?
And I mentioned this earlier, but I thought it was a great portrayal of what they saw at the beginning was not what they saw at the end. And so the constant need for critical thinking, continuing to gather information, that was fairly spot on. Again, take the demon out, but that's what we're constantly doing. You talk about like under pressure. Well, I mentioned it a few times, but we go to court. And so what is our case? If we're getting legally involved with a family, do we have the evidence? And I can say this, some judges interpret the same evidence differently. Mm-hmm. And so you go to court and you see one judge and you're going to get your order. You see another judge and you're just not sure. And so we talked about the checks and balances and making decisions. We're making the same decisions, but depending on who we stand in front of, it might be valued differently. It might be determined to be not enough or too much. And so that's a part of it where we have these checks and balances, but the decisions of some of the decision makers vary wildly. And I've worked in other communities, or I've had court-involved files come from other communities, and some of the decisions made there we wouldn't do here. And so how is that fair to families, or what can they expect from child protection or the courts when a judge in Nelson or a judge in Kamloops or a judge in Smithers, all three of those judges might see the same thing quite differently. And so our consistency that we try to bring to the table, we try to be the same, but that doesn't mean our checks and balances agree with us.
Does that part of the job become frustrating?
I would, yes and no. No, from the perspective of that's the system. And so we have to work with the system that we've got. Yes, for the obvious reasons that it's like, I've done all this work, and some judges there, one I'm thinking of, pro mom, then pro dad, and then is okay with child protection being right. So for others, it's a little bit different. And some, it's like if we've met the threshold, then they will give us our court order. So you don't know what you're facing is the frustration with some of those times that we go to court. We have a lot of oversight internally. I have a team leader. We have management of a couple levels here in Kamloops. There's things like the representative for children and youth, the ombudsperson, the MLA, privacy commission might be involved on some files. So there's all these checks and balances, and how they weigh in may vary depending on their purview and what they do. So we work with all that scrutiny, and I think it's good. I'm fine with it, that it helps us to do our job well. But when, again, someone says you did something wrong, but that was the direction from my management, then who wins here? Well, I'm going to go with my management, not an outside entity. So there are those sort of struggles at times with how they believe our work should be done versus how I'm told my work should be done. and so you put all that together and try to come to a good conclusion. Good luck.
Something that I'm always curious about when people who work in an area of work such as yourself, where you are faced by these real world evils on a daily basis, really, like you can see like the worst of people sometimes, or most times, I would suspect. Obviously, we had you watch this film, and we really appreciate that you checked it out so that we could have this conversation today. But is it difficult to watch content like this for entertainment? Like watch shows where it depicts social worker and it depicts children in harm, such as this film did. Like, is that hard to, when you're off the clock, or at least not at work in the office, and you're sitting down to watch something? Is this content that you generally try to avoid?
I don't know if I'd avoid it, but do I purposely digest it? Probably not. Like I like the movie I Am Sam, and there was a social worker element in there too, right? But I know some of my colleagues, like they're into the true crime. They're into, they'll read psychological today papers of how to deal with sexual offenders. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that in my spare time. So different strokes, different folks is maybe the way to say it. If I come across something good, I'll enjoy it. But I don't know if there's a social worker network or something like that of types of shows or podcasts or whatever, but I'm not deep into it, to maybe more succinctly answer your question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. You've already kind of mentioned that the film obviously being set in New York, there are potentially some differences in the system. Was there any that kind of stuck out as different between what you would see here in Kamloops and what we saw in the film set in New York?
One that I was thinking of that I haven't brought up was, and I'm reading into the film, they didn't say this, but it looked like when Lilith first was removed from her parents, she was put in more of a group home. It looked like a bigger facility with multiple, maybe dozens of children. We try to do more foster homes where it's a family, and maybe they've got their own children, maybe their children have grown up and they've got younger children coming in. So we try to make it less group home and more a family home for children. Now, in the film, one of the things that they did is Emily Jenkins, the social worker, had Lilith come and live with her, so not in a group home. And in BC here, we call that an out-of-care placement, where it's not in a foster home, not in a group home, and it is with someone that the child may know, friend, family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, something like that. So we really emphasize not having children, first off in group homes, but secondly in foster homes if we can help it, that we put children with someone that they know or have a relationship with, connection with. It could be a coach, it could be a neighbor, it could be elders, it could be a whole bunch of different things. But if it fits, if it's more natural, then we try to emphasize that. So that was one piece that, and this is New York, which is, again, not Canada, and yet it was a similarity. So I thought that was kind of nice to see that, again, not specifically we're trying to do out of care, but there was some connection there.
Nice. Kind of on the same line, was there any, and I think you touched on this a little bit with the the giving out your phone number, was there any moral or ethical boundaries that were different in the film from reality, or did they kind of play the line realistically?
I thought it was fairly close, but again, there was no way I'd be able to have a child that I'd removed come to my home. And I think, so you mentioned earlier, Zach, about like the mental health piece. Well, if I do the work all day and then I go home and I'm still doing the work,
Right.
like where's that break there? So that's a healthy boundary that is put in place for us, that we don't have that. But again, think of the ethical ramifications of, I'm going to court to keep this child from their parents, living with their parents, and then I'm getting paid to have the child in my home. So there's a conflict of interest there. This movie didn't go into that, but part of the realities of here in BC, why not many social workers are ever able to foster, is because of that conflict of interest piece. The handing out the phone number, that was a big one, because we're not always available for our families, right? We're not supposed to be. I've had colleagues that have done that and it has not gone well for them. And so like, it's a healthy boundary to have, that you will last in this field. I think of, if I'm supposed to be on holidays, well, I'm in Europe, say, it doesn't happen, but I'm in Europe and the kid's calling from Kamloops. Well, how can I help? Right? I'm removed. So we're setting people up for failure if we're giving them our personal information as well, because we're not supposed to be there for them all the time. There are colleagues that they do work. We have someone on 24/7 in just about every community or available. So it might be sleeping and the phone rings and they have to get up and answer it. They're not necessarily waiting in the office, but we have those checks and balances for ourselves as well, because we're not supposed to be that enmeshed. I'm supposed to be in my lane as a child protection social worker, not as counselor, not as a parachute in and save you from everything. That would be ideal if we could, but that would also burn us out. So there's some healthy boundaries there that this movie kind of crossed over as well. But overall, like, I think the standards, we have standards of conduct in BC that we're supposed to follow. So there's things like that we try to aspire to, and that eliminates some of these conflicts.
You've talked about a little bit throughout this entire conversation, but was there anything like glaringly left out or brushed over in the film that you were kind of surprised by? Like, oh, that's like an everyday thing, and they didn't even talk about that or show that. Like, was there anything that seemed so glaringly obvious that it was missing to you?
I mean, this is one case, and I don't know what her other 38 were like, that there might have been some crossover. But I think one of the pieces that I would raise is how in our line of work, we're working with the whole family. So that's not just the victim. Sometimes that's the offender. So how do you work with an offender when that might not be what you want to do? You might want to do harm to this offender because of what they've done, right? So that's a piece, and talking about just some social work shows in general, or media in general, that I've not seen too often. Not that I've seen all of them, but a large part of our job is that still might be the child's parent. And so we have to work with that person. We have to see if they can be reintegrated back into the family for whatever it is that they have done. So that's a piece that I don't see in media too often. So I raise it here, not specific to this movie, but that we don't just work with, say, the child. We might work with a whole spectrum of adults that have done various things, and we have to work with them and offer them a chance to change as well, offer them the ability to improve their parenting or their mental health or their whatever it may be. So that's a piece that stands out to me, is I just haven't come across it, where we don't just work with victims, we work with offenders as well.
Yeah, that's definitely, I can't think of any piece of media that.
Yeah, no, I was trying to think too, and I was like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, that's a very, very interesting perspective I hadn't actually considered. So thank you very much for sharing. Yeah. You mentioned you've worked in smaller communities and then also larger urban areas. How do you find the difference? And you've touched on this a little bit, in social work in like a small community versus here or a larger urban center like New York or Vancouver or something?
Yeah, and it varies. It really, really varies, just to be clear. Quick segue, but I know Stats Canada approached child protection on the Lower Mainland at one point in time and said, do you realize how your work is going to change? Because there were 5 different nations were having refugees and immigrants and being settled into one neighborhood on the Lower Mainland. And those communities, women didn't hold authority. Women didn't work for the government, which is a large part of child protection. They came from patriarchal families where the dad did the talking, the women didn't. The children were seen and not heard, or whatever you can think of. There was a concentration in one area of certain types of beliefs and traits and codes of conduct, whether stated or unstated. And so when Kamloops isn't like that. We've got a wide variety of people, but we don't have an intense concentration in one neighborhood. So if you're walking into one of those neighborhoods when you might not be perceived as someone that should be listened to, yet you've got legislation behind you, that, you know, you shouldn't be talking to the head of the household, well, that's not the way it works. And so some urban centers have like a difference like that we don't have, but they might be resource rich in the sense that there's so many community supports that, say, a small town doesn't have. So it varies. I was working at the next office east of here, and they had at one point in time for mental health supports a 46-week wait list. So as a social worker, when you're dealing with a family that has mental health struggles, can you imagine how often you're going to be involved with that family when they can't get help for 46 weeks? And sort of almost an ethical question that I think we touched a little bit earlier, but I didn't say, we might be the only people reaching out to them. And so they're turning to us for things that we're not supposed to do, but we're all that they have. They're asking for almost counseling supports, and we're not that. I want to be very clear about that, but they don't have anyone. And so they're asking you questions that are way above your pay grade and credentials, but they don't have anyone. So you do your best, but again, you know, it's insufficient for what the people actually need. And so that's one of those big differences where some communities have got so many counselors and some don't. Or I think of some places up north there, it's that COVID and going virtual really helped open up potential supports, but you're now talking to your counselor that's 2,000 kilometers away or something like that. Like, how relatable is that for families? Does that actually meet their need? So every community, big or small, has different barriers that they're working around and with, and how we as social workers work depends on all those factors.
So as we start to wrap up here, do you think the film reinforced any negative stereotypes about social work?
I don't know if it did. I mean, from the perspective of, you know, this was a lady that cared, which I think a lot of us do here. You've heard some of the stories or some of the details that we have to go to. And we wouldn't be doing this job if we didn't think that we could make a positive difference for people. So there is that element, but I mean, again, it's a female-dominated industry. Is that a stereotype? She cared. Is that a stereotype? But I wouldn't say it was inaccurately portrayed, that she did a lot of the things that I think a lot of us would do. So I wouldn't say, aside from if I've got clients out there that are wondering why I'm not giving them my personal information so that they can reach me 24/7 and they think they're getting underserved by me, maybe. But other than that, I think it was fairly good.
Nice.
If there's one thing that you could change about how social working is depicted in Case 39, is there anything that sticks out to you immediately of what you would maybe either add to or remove entirely from the film?
You mean the demon?
Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, I know that was the point of the movie, was sort of like the horror genre, but I also think there's so much of human nature that's pretty horrific that you could have done something just as terrifying without actually needing to work a demon in there, unfortunately. But I think aside from the demon, I think I'd take that out.
There you go.
That's fair. We actually haven't talked about the demon very much today. So.
Well, I don't think it comes up in his everyday working.
Yeah,
unless I'm wrong.
No, I think you're accurate.
Perfect. So kind of as our final question, is there anything that the community in Kamloops here could do to better support you in your work?
That's a great question. And I mean, we're funded by government, so there's not much that people could do. And I guess the piece that I would ask for, though, is that I mentioned earlier about like all the sources of information that we gather to try to come to the best decision possible. And that doesn't mean that we even get there. It could still be a bad decision, right? But it's well informed. You hear things in media or you see someone post something online, that's one slice of the pie. There's a lot more pie there that we may know that the public doesn't, and we can't share because it's confidential. And yet people are saying things, and there's hooting and hollering about that piece that's been put out there, but it could be such a small part of the pie. So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes or not shared online or in media for the most part that people just won't know. And so you can tar and feather social workers based on that one little slice of pie, but there might be a lot of other stuff that's going on. And so please believe that there's a lot of information that we're sorting through when we make these decisions.
Does it ever affect social workers or yourself specifically to see, the families you're working with in the media or even just in social media being posted about?
It can be uncomfortable from the perspective of now the minister is reaching down to say, what did this client say? And I'm like, right, all right, here we go. Which it's fair to be called into account for things, but again, what is said online might not be accurate. And I've had it both ways where a dad went to media and was blaming the mom. So it wasn't even at us, but was things were being said about someone else because they were exes and there was spite and there was, so how accurate do you think that information is going to be? And so that is something that we have to work through or something that we have to hear about at times. Do I lose sleep over it? Not really, because that's what people are going to do. And if I was so worried about controlling that, I'd be in a funny farm pretty quick here. So you have to let those go, right? Yeah, you can't live or die by those.
Awesome. Well, I think with that kind of wraps up our main question period, but we do have one little segment we like to do before the end called Feasible or Flimsy. So if Zach usually takes it, I'll let you.
Basically, because we're not in the social working environment or profession, Kyle and I watch this movie and sometimes we get into debates of could that actually happen, could that not actually happen. So we put them in this segment called Feasible or Flimsy. Basically, we're just going to ask you a couple of questions of some things we saw in the movie and ask you if that's feasible, could that happen, does that happen, or if it's flimsy, totally inaccurate, totally just made for the narrative and the movie for entertainment's sake. The first one we have here, you kind of already answered about fostering a kid whose case you're working. Which I believe you would probably classify as flimsy from what I was hearing beforehand.
I would say that. Again, other jurisdictions, maybe it's feasible, but not here in BC.
All right. Do social workers visit the crime scenes?
I've walked in when the blood is still drying.
Wow. Okay. So feasible.
Okay.
Keeping your job after screaming and cursing at a parent or a client.
That's feasible because we're in a union, or some people are in a union. Not every child protection agency is unionized, but that's feasible. Now, maybe you're in a different position, or you would have a deep conversation with a few people around the building, but it's not necessarily a fireable offense. Depends. What was portrayed is unlikely to be fireable, but some people have probably been justifiably let go because of worse things that they have screamed at people.
Fair enough.
Gotcha.
The last one we have is giving out a personal cell phone number, which I think we've talked about quite a bit, so we already kind of know that's probably pretty flimsy. Do you have one off the top of your head that you'd want to add before we end the segment?
Off the top of my head. Would you say kind of the being left alone in the house after everyone's gone and everything, but being left alone in a potentially a crime scene? In the movie, it let her do some detective work, but would that be accurate?
No. If it's a crime scene, the police control it. We don't get to just wander through. And then it's someone else's house. So if we don't have permission to be there, then we wouldn't be in someone's house without permission. That's, kind of violation of law.
Perfect.
Well, there you go. That completes feasible or flimsy.
Sure does.
We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much again for joining us for this podcast. We do have just 2 other questions before we get out of here, and that is rating the film. We have 2 ratings. One of them is of accuracy, and one of them is just the film in and of itself for a recommendation for someone to watch. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely inaccurate, they got everything wrong, and 10 being the most accurate you could get, where would you place this movie on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say from like the social work perspective and a lot of the things, we've talked about it, that there was a decent amount of accuracy, I felt. So I'd put that at about a 6 or 7, again, taking the demon out of it. Right. But because if you throw that in there, we might have to lower this accuracy scale. Of course, someone else might have come across that and said, no, it's very accurate. So
could be feasible.
Right, exactly. In my world, I'd say about a 6 or 7 accuracy. And then the other part was, would I go see the film? I'd probably put it around the same 5, 6, because I don't digest a lot of horror movies, but this one was, I didn't lose sleep over it. I wasn't scared. I didn't have to the light on. It wasn't that bad. So solid 5 or 6 in there.
All right, perfect.
I find that like late 2000s hard lighting kind of takes me out a little bit. Right. It makes it a little like, it's like weird hard studio lighting. It's so specific to the late 2000s. Yeah, it definitely it takes me out of those horror movies when I see that a little bit. I'm glad that you didn't lose any sleep over it, and I am sorry we didn't warn you when it was a horror.
We wanted it to be a surprise.
It was.
Yeah, that demon comes in about like a third of the way in, and it is quite a immediate flip.
Yeah, that little girl's so good though. Like Jodelle
amazing.
Forland, I thought she was scarier before the demon CGI showed up, but that's just me.
Amazing. Well, that's everything for us. Thank you so much. We're gonna do a quick social media here. So if you enjoyed the episode, watching or listening, thank you so much for giving us your time. And you can feel free to check us out on Facebook or Instagram. On Facebook, we're Capes of Kamloops, and on Instagram, we're capesofkamloops.pod. With that, again, thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you do for this community and for the families and children here. Is there anything that you would like to say directly to the community as a little bit of a send-off for the episode?
I'm winging it here, but it's amazing how many people here, even if it's a 1% chance, they will devote 100% in their efforts to make the lives of kids and families better. And I'm really proud of the work that we do here in Kamloops.
Awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Again, thank you very, very much. So for Capes of Kamloops, I'm Kyle.
I'm Zach.
Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this special screening of Case 39, presented by the Capes of Kamloops podcast, and also brought to you by StoryHive and TELUS. I am Zach. This is Kyle. We are the hosts of the podcast Capes of Kamloops. What is Capes of Kamloops? Well, it's a podcast, a video podcast that's going to come out next spring, where basically we screen a movie every other week. We've got 2 more on the docket here, and with the movie that takes a profession that someone does in Kamloops, we're also going to pair that with someone in Kamloops who does the profession. So tonight we're watching Case 39 dealing with social working. So we're going to sit down with a local social worker and have an interview about what they thought of the film, the inaccuracies, the accuracies of the film, and how it relates to the profession. And that's going to come out on YouTube, on Object TV through TELUS, and also on Spotify audibly. And it'll be, again, next spring, so keep your eyes open for that. And also, we're going to pass this over to Kyle for more information.
Hello, so thanks again for coming. As you're all aware, we were collecting optional donations at the door for interior community services. So we're glad to be able to help support the work that they do in our community. I think out of all of the communities all of the charities we've worked with, they are the most Kamloops local, which is really cool. So thank you to everyone for supporting that. And thank you to the Paramount Theatre as well for supporting us, and to all the KFS volunteers outside. They've done a lot to help us out. And if you guys like this one and like more free movies, we're screening Clerks in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks after that, we're screening Spotlight. And those should both be a lot of fun. So thanks for coming out, everyone. And I think let's watch this movie.
Enjoy the show.